Oh, you're here. Good. I was hoping for company. You see, I've got stories, dark ones, chilling ones, the kind that keep you up at night. Mythical creatures, curses, horrors you can't escape. Shall we begin? Don't worry, I won't bite. Much.
This story took place back in the 1980s in a remote village deep in the mountains of southern China. The village was called Qingya. Surrounded on three sides by mist-covered mountains and soaked in damp air year-round, Qingya was a small place where the fields were few and the people lived by what they could gather from the land. There was a village doctor there, an elderly man in his late 50s, known to all as Dr. Lin. He had once worked at the county hospital, but decades ago he'd come into the mountains as part of a rural medical program. Over time, he grew used to life in the village and simply never left. Before Dr. Lin arrived, villagers from Qingya and the surrounding settlements had no choice but to treat illnesses with wild herbs they foraged themselves. In serious cases, they would put the sick on a homemade wooden cart and push it over miles of winding mountain roads to reach the nearest township clinic. Things changed after Dr. Lin settled in. From then on, if someone got sick, they'd just go find him. Dr. Lin was not only kind, but skilled. Whether it was a fever, a bad fall, stomach trouble, or even a poisonous snake bite, he could treat it. People from miles around came to seek his help. The strange thing that happened to him took place one evening in early autumn. The sun hadn't quite set. Dr. Lin had just returned from gathering herbs and was hanging a bundle of green snake grass out to dry behind his house. As he washed his hands at the water tank, he suddenly heard a faint sound from the direction of the mountain stream, someone sobbing. It wasn't a regular cry, it was soft, almost like it was bubbling up from beneath the water itself, soaked with moisture and echoing faintly through the air. Dr. Lin frowned and glanced around. Maybe it was a village child who had wandered off, but the crying came and went in broken pieces, and he couldn't ignore it. He put on his coat, grabbed his medicine kit, and followed the narrow trail down toward the stream. He knew the path well. He'd walked it for years. He could have found his way even with his eyes closed. But that night was different. He had only gone a few dozen steps when mist began to rise from the ground. It crept low, swirling around his ankles like a damp cloth brushing across his feet. As he walked further, Dr. Lin began to feel something was off. That path usually sloped gently southwest, but this time it seemed to be bending slowly toward the mountains. The woods thickened around him. The trees were taller, the air heavier. Even stranger, there were thin, glistening trails across the dirt, like something had been dragging wet cloth through the underbrush, long winding streaks that disappeared deeper into the forest. He started to grow uneasy. Mountain weather was unpredictable. Maybe something was wrong. He turned, thinking to go back, but when he looked behind him, the path was gone. Nothing but thick mist. He couldn't even see a meter behind him. He stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then from somewhere ahead, he heard a soft cough. It made his heart skip a beat. It was a woman's cough. Gentle, barely audible. Sure enough, a figure stepped slowly out from between the trees. It was a young woman, wrapped in a headscarf, her face pale and her expression tense. She walked with a slight limp, hands clasped in front of her stomach. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "You're Dr. Lin, right?" she asked quietly, barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb something. Dr. Lin nodded, but before he could say anything, the woman rushed to explain, "Please, come with me. My sister, she's in a bad way. She's in labor, and it's been going on all night. She can't take it anymore." Hearing that it was a matter of life and death, Doctor, Lynn didn't hesitate. "All right," he said. "Take me to her." The woman turned immediately and began walking. She moved quickly, her feet barely touching the ground. Dr. Lynn followed closely behind, medicine kit in hand. She didn't say another word the entire way. After walking for roughly the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, the path ahead opened up. Dr. Lynn looked up and realized they had arrived at the base of a cliff he had never seen before. There was a natural cave entrance beneath the rock face. 2 pine oil torches flickered on either side of the entrance, their flames swaying in the breeze. The woman led him inside. The cave went deep, but it was warmer than outside. The stone walls were damp and slick, and the air was thick with moisture. There was also a faint, unfamiliar fragrance, something like herbs or incense. They passed through 2 stone doorways before entering a large chamber. In the center of the room stood a stone bed. A woman lay on it, pale as a ghost, her belly swollen, her body drenched in sweat. "This is my sister," the younger woman said softly. Dr. Lynn set down his bag and took the woman's pulse. It was weak and irregular, clearly a difficult labor. The fetus hadn't descended, and she had lost too much strength. He began treatment right away. He used acupuncture to stimulate the flow of qi and brewed a tonic to replenish her energy. But the longer he worked, the more unsettled he became. When he inserted the needle into the woman's skin, it didn't feel right. It wasn't the sensation of piercing flesh. It was lighter, brittle, like slipping into something with a thin shell. He discreetly lifted her wrist and glanced down. Under the sweat and pallor, he noticed faint, scale-like patterns just beneath the skin. Dr. Lynn's heart gave a sudden thump, but he kept his face calm. He continued treating her as before, though in his mind he had begun to suspect. These people weren't human. Before long, the woman let out a sharp, rasping cry. Her whole body arched like a bow, or more precisely, like a snake. A wave of wet, musky air filled the room. Dr. Lynn recoiled slightly, eyes widening as something slick and shapeless slid out from her lower body and landed on the cloth he had laid out. The newborn didn't cry, its eyes were closed, its skin bluish. The mother let out a long breath and fell unconscious. Dr. Lynn quickly lifted the baby and checked its breathing. Faint but present. Heartbeat was weak. He rubbed his palms together, placed them gently on the baby's back, and softly whispered calming words. A moment later, the child let out a thin, weak cry. Dr. Lynn cleaned the infant, wrapped it in fresh cloth, and held it quietly. Then the people seated around the chamber, who he hadn't even noticed before, stood up one by one and approached him. Each of them bowed deeply, their expressions solemn. They thanked him in soft voices over and over. Dr. Lynn bowed in return, feeling awkward. The atmosphere in the cave was heavy and strange. He couldn't say exactly what was wrong, but he felt a deep unease. "I've done what I can," he said. "Mother and child are safe. I'll take my leave." The young woman who had brought him there smiled faintly. "Doctor Lynn, your kindness is great. Let me escort you down the mountain." He nodded. Together they left the cave. As he turned back for a final look, the stone doors of the cave slowly closed behind them, sealing it off as though it had never existed. They walked through the woods again. The path back was clear now. It didn't twist or climb like before. In what felt like just a short walk, they reached the familiar trail. Dr. Lynn checked the sky. He had thought it was late at night, but the stars told him it was only around 9 p.m. At the edge of the village, the woman stopped and bowed again. Then she turned and disappeared into the woods without a word. Dr. Lin stood for a while, silent. The whole thing felt like a dream, except he knew he hadn't imagined it. He picked up his medicine kit and quietly made his way home. Before the sun was even up the next morning, Dr. Lin was already awake. He lay on his bed, staring at the wooden beams above him, replaying the events of the night before. He clearly remembered passing through the misty stream path, entering that strange cave, and helping deliver a very odd child. But now that he tried to recall where exactly the cave had been, or where that woman had come from, he couldn't say. Everything felt hazy. The sky was just beginning to lighten. Dr. Lin threw on his old jacket, skipped breakfast, and grabbed his medicine bag once more. He needed to go back to see if what he experienced really happened, or if it had all been some kind of dream. That question still lingered in his heart. Where was that cave? Instead of taking the usual path, he circled around behind the village, heading in the direction where he had first heard the crying. Few people ever walked this way. The grass was knee-high, and the ground was soft with moss. Dr. Lin walked slowly, head down, looking for any trace of the night before. At first, he did find a few broken branches and faint, wet footprints, remnants from the previous night. But the further he went, the less he saw. The signs faded until the trail was lost completely. After walking for about 40 minutes, Dr. Lin stopped under a large pine tree. There was a small clearing beneath the tree. In the center stood a half-buried stone tablet, its surface covered in moss. Dr. Lin knelt down and brushed it clean. At the bottom of the stone, he could just make out 3 ancient characters. Shrine to the serpent immortal. He stared at it for a long time. His heart slowly began to understand. Looking beyond the stone, he saw a collapsed cave entrance. The rocks nearby had been cleared recently. It looked like someone had wiped them clean. A faint, damp breath of air drifted out from inside the cave. Dr. Lin leaned in and peered into the darkness, but he couldn't see anything. He didn't dare go inside. Just as he turned to leave, something caught his eye in the grass a few steps away. He walked over and gently pushed the grass aside. Lying there, untouched, was a complete snake's shed skin, long and glistening. Wrapped around the skin was a strip of cloth. It was the same cloth Dr. Lin had used the night before to tie off the baby's umbilical cord. His chest tightened. Without another thought, he packed up and quickly made his way back down the mountain. From that day on, Dr. Lin never spoke a word about what he'd seen. He went on with his life as usual, making house calls, collecting herbs, as if nothing had ever happened. But there was one thing that changed. Every lunar new moon and full moon, like clockwork, a small bundle of freshly picked mountain herbs would appear on the stone platform outside his front door, wrapped neatly in a clean leaf and tied with thin hemp string. It didn't matter if it was raining, storming, or freezing. The herbs were always fresh, never wilted. Dr. Lin knew where they came from. He never refused them. He simply sorted the herbs, dried them, and used them in his medicine. He never mentioned that night again. One year, during the Ghost Festival in the 7th lunar month, a few village kids sneaked up the back mountain to set off firecrackers. When they returned that evening, their faces were pale and they were shaking with fear. They said they had seen a huge snake near an old shrine stone. It was coiled in front of the cave, its entire body silvery white. Its eyes glowed a bright green, and they said they looked like a person's eyes. Dr. Lin said nothing. He only told the villagers not to let their children wander behind the mountain anymore. Later that evening, he quietly brought a bundle of incense and a scoop of white rice to the village ancestral hall to pay respects to the local spirits. One day, after returning from a long day of visits, Dr. Lin set down his medicine bag and stood in his courtyard for a long time. He stared silently at the back mountain, like he was waiting for someone. On the night before his passing, now an old man, he asked someone to burn a talisman for him. As it turned to ash, he mumbled softly under his breath, "It was nothing. No need to repay kindness anymore. You may go now." From that day on, the little herb bundles never appeared again. Even many years later, some of the village elders would still whisper among themselves, saying, "Dr. Lin of Qingye village. They say he once saved a family of serpent spirits. Cured their mother, kept their bloodline alive. That's why, for decades, the mountain was quiet. No snakes, no strange things. But those were just stories passed from mouth to ear. After all, mountain things are never easy to explain."